Hey everybody, thank you for pulling into the Palmetto Pit Stop. I am Tony here with Adam. We are looking to recap Go Bowling at the Glen. It was a big strike, if you will, for Chris Buescher winning that race. Van Gisbergen right behind him. Some very tight racing action as we close things out at good old WGI. We are looking towards Bristol Motor Speedway this Saturday night, not Sunday, but the racing action continues. The playoff race continues as well, and a lot of action is to happen. We're breaking it all down. So, Adam, what did you think with the way things closed out this past weekend?
Well, it was very reminiscent of Brad Keselowski's battle with Marcos Ambrose early in the 2010s. That one of the greatest last laps in NASCAR history, with Kyle Busch spinning out, and then that intense battle with Marcos Ambrose and Keselowski, and then flipping the script where Keselowski's the owner of the guy who outduels the man from down under. And incredible racing by Buescher. Extremely classy finish by Shane Van Gisbergen. Had the opportunity to dive bomb. He said on the radio, he's like, I'm going to do this right. He's going to do it the right way. That made for a much better finish because it would have been a little tainted if we got a repeat of Richmond. But glad to have witnessed such an amazing finish and an amazing call, of course, by Lee Diffie, who's been on the nose with every single one so far. 4 for 4 in his career on these final lap calls with Daytona, Darlington, last week at Atlanta, and then now Watkins Glen. So I can only imagine how great his championship call is going to be, how great the Talladega finish is going to be, because that one always creates a great finish. And now we have night racing at Bristol this weekend, as we mentioned. But just off the bat, before we get any further, I'd like to wish Tony and my sister a happy anniversary.
Oh, thanks, buddy. Oh, yeah. Recording this on September 18th, 4 years of marriage. Wedded bliss, if you will, for the most part. For the most part.
Yeah, I had to steal them before they can get to their little anniversary plans. But, again, happy anniversary.
Thanks, buddy.
In some racing news, some fresh off-the-press stuff. Bubba Wallace inking a brand new deal at 2311, an extension, which brings forward a question of, is this a career place for him? Is this where he's going to finish his career? I think that's the best fit for him. I don't think there is a better duo for 2311. I think Tyler Reddick and Bubba Wallace are the faces of 2311. I think they always will be. Assuming Denny Hamlin does not go through a little breakup with Joe Gibbs, which I don't see happening, but assuming he does not leave Joe Gibbs to race for his own team, I think this two-team duo of Bubba and Reddick, assuming they don't get a new charter in next year, this should be where they live. This should be their careers. I love seeing that 23. That 45 fits Tyler Reddick so perfectly, especially in all the Jumpman cars. So getting that extension done, even with the charter agreement not being signed yet for 2311, makes things a little interesting. But Bubba Wallace was showing a little concern with these negotiations falling through. But clearly, Denny Hamlin, Michael Jordan, the guys over at 2311 wanted to make sure Bubba Wallace was back in that seat for next year and beyond. And it's hard to see any reason why they shouldn't.
Now, for one of the smaller squads in NASCAR, there's still a lot of bubbling under talent for Bubba. He's caught the bad end of a lot of deals this year. Reddick, of course, the regular season champion, so there's not too much negative to say about his season, but just shows the confidence that they have that he can take that next step. We were just talking about it a little bit before. He's still relatively far from what anyone would call an elite driver. He's still more so middle of the pack, but still hangs around. He's up there around the top 10 in many, many races. Just hasn't been able to get it done this season, but that potential is clearly seen for him down the road.
Absolutely. And I think Denny Hamlin mentioned this on his podcast. The issue, I think, with Bubba Wallace, and not just Bubba Wallace, it is the 23 team. They just need to show that initiative, that consistency that they show in the summer. Because these last 2 years at 2311, they have been great in the summer months. Like, once it heats up, so does that team. But their issue is the early stretch. That March to April, before the All-Star race, Bubba Wallace's team and Bubba Wallace, they just weren't getting the finishes. Of course, they had top fives at Daytona and Atlanta to start the year. And he had another good race at Martinsville. I believe he finished fourth to break up the 1, 2, 3, 4 finish for Hendrick during their special event. I think that was their 40th or 50th anniversary that day. Bubba Wallace played a little bit of a spoiler to that finish, but they need to get some consistency going. Of course, luck plays a big role in things. People debate luck in sports a lot because everything can be controlled, not being in these situations.
Yeah, very much so.
But it's hard to blame Bubba for some of these things. I mean, he gets caught up in a wreck at Daytona, still manages to bring home a top 10 finish. Harrison Burton wins the race, so it doesn't matter. He gets wrapped up at the Darlington crash that ends his playoff drought, or that ends his playoff run, I mean, and Chase Briscoe won the race anyway. But you can also argue he had the pole. He should have won if he wanted to be in the playoffs. So there's a big back and forth, and I think that consistency is always going to be the key to success in everything. That 2311 has shown that they can be consistent. They've shown it with the 45. Tyler Reddick was on a tear in the summer months, and he's had a little less luck last week at Watkins Glen, but he's still the same driver. So if the 23 team can just, in this offseason, take the disappointment and just heartbreak of missing the playoffs, because Bubba Wallace is very hard on himself. He's very vocal about how hard on himself he is. If they can just take that and instead of letting it drag them down, use it to boost themselves up, the 23 team could end up stealing a few wins. I think they could steal a few wins in the next few weeks. Bubba Wallace is very good at some of these tracks, Talladega, of course, but he has some good runs at the future tracks or the upcoming tracks. So he could steal one in the coming weeks, but their priority, of course, make sure that they're finishing these races off well for the rest of the season. But 2025 seems like it should be, if it's going to happen, it has to be Bubba's year in 2025. I'm not saying he has to win the championship, but win a race or two, finish consistently like Reddick is, and put yourself so you're not coming down to the wire on elimination, because he had to do it in 2023. He had to survive Daytona to make the playoffs. This year he gets eliminated because he just couldn't finish things off. Of course, we said things not going his way, but Bubba Wallace has the ingredients. He just has to bake the cake.
Yeah, he's definitely one of those drivers that has been just settled around that middle of the pack, in and out of the playoff race, the feeling bubblicious, just like, we talked about earlier in these podcasts, how it is with college basketball teams in the NCAA tournament. Always, is he going to be in? Is he not going to be in? We got to find out and wait till the end of the season without being able to claim or stake a claim into just, that part of the field earlier in the season, because just the success isn't there. Always got to be trying to fight that uphill battle without being able to get any early season wins, and even just really finishing consistent towards the top 5 of these races earlier in the season. So it is going to be a stretch of time now with getting this extension to show, all right, I belong here. I can make that leap and be able to compete with some of these other drivers that have already made those jumps. Reddick, of course, his own teammate, and, plenty of your other household names already with, teams like Gibbs and Hendrick cars. So we shall see as we go down the road. Just wanted to update you guys on that for any driver news before we get down to the breakdown of now what we leave in the rearview mirror, and that is go bowling at the Glen.
Yep, the second to last road course on the schedule. I firmly believe this should be a playoff race every year. If you want a road course in the playoffs like the Roval, get rid of the Roval, put Watkins Glen in. Watkins Glen, people were saying it wasn't as great of a race. I could see it in the first half, but things really started to heat up once drivers were trying to push at the end there, maybe pushing a little too hard, causing all these overtime incidents. But I think Watkins Glen is the perfect place for a playoff race. I think it's produced some great racing in the past. If they can just figure out this tire wear and they can figure out this car with the dirty air, I think things are there are going to be some good races at the Glen. The finish, we saw it, incredible last lap race there. They just need to put, again, like Bubba Wallace, they just got to put everything together. They have a car that runs really, really well at the 1.5 miles. They're creating some great finishes. This year has been the king of great finishes. You had Atlanta 3 wide. Daytona 500 a little underwhelming because it ended so it ended under caution. So
It did, yeah.
But it did come down to two teammates being side by side, and it was how quick could they hit the caution button that determined who won the Daytona 500. You had the race at Kansas, closest finish in NASCAR history. You had that insane finish at Darlington that we got to watch in person with the battle between Buescher and Reddick, where Keselowski stole it when they got into each other in the turns.
Yeah, he did. That was a tough one.
Yeah, that was heartbreaking to be at the race and have you as a newly appointed Tyler Reddick fan.
I was like, oh man, I'm just coming to see him in Darlington. He's going to win. Yes. Got to keep coming back here.
But, I mean, Tyler Reddick, he's shown he can win on basically anything now and compete on anything. So any race you go to, you could end up with Tyler Reddick in victory lane. But unfortunately wasn't the case this weekend. A lot of playoff drivers struggled. I think that there was so much pressure. I don't know about pressure, but so many eyes on Hendrick, and they were non-existent.
No, it was crazy, and I have a couple, followers even on just my Facebook page who I've been talking to who are fans of more Hendrick drivers, and just in disbelief of how things went. Things can be a little bit topsy-turvy when you go into these road courses, and from what I've even just noticed, obviously this year, it's easy to see results that might be surprising, saying, oh, how are those drivers in the top 10? Oh, man, how are the guys that are actually competing and have been more consistent throughout the year, towards the bottom half and not up in the top 10? It was that type of day.
Yeah, and as a playoff as a whole, we'll get to this a little later, but the only guy to lead a lap was Alex Bowman out of the Hendrick guys. None of them finished top 10. None of them got stage points. It was just a complete shutout in the wrong way for Hendrick. And I feel like if I'm Hendrick and I go into Watkins Glen and I'm not even positioned to win, I'm not competitive. Granted, you have to give a pass to some of these guys who got caught up in incidents. William Byron with that freak accident bouncing into Keselowski.
Really, really tough. Really, really tough there. And that's the thing. If you can't even get going in a road course, you're already getting bunched up, you're already going to see those issues. You just don't really have the chance to settle in. And with a road course like WGI, you really need to, even if you've been on that course before, you're an experienced NASCAR driver. You can still say, oh yeah, I know this course like the back of my hand, but until you're actually out there on the track and you get some laps in, it's still going to be tough on you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the finishes, like I said, all of them outside the top 10. The favorite going into the race, Kyle Larson, ended up 12th. Again, not a lap led, no stage points for him.
Nope.
Bowman, who has been probably the surprise of the playoffs for Hendrick, even more so than the opposite direction of Kyle Larson. But Alex Bowman has gained the most points in the playoffs so far. He's been super consistent. I had him as an early out. He could be the last man standing at Hendrick, depending on how things have been going. It could be trending in that direction.
Yeah, looking really solid.
Chase Elliott finishing just behind Alex Bowman, finishing 18th, 19th, and then William Byron, of course, that really, really weird crash, finishing 34th, one wheel on the side of Brad Keselowski's car. But back in the day, Tony, I don't know. I say back in the day, I mean like mid-2010s. There was a nickname for Alex Bowman. This was when he was at BK Racing, and it was Bad Luck Bowman. And he acknowledged these. I have a very distinct memory of him addressing this nickname in an interview.
Not the best name you'd want to have.
Well, I have come up with one for Larson so far in the playoffs. It's been Lousy Luck Larson. Incredibly bad and just unlucky crash at Atlanta. MIA in Watkins Glen, despite being the favorite. He has fallen to 9th in the points, just 26 above the cut line. So Bristol, he needs a good outing. He doesn't need a fantastic one. I don't think he has to go out there and win. Not to move on to the next round, but maybe the guys at Hendrick think, hey, we need to get this 5-car going, because he's our bread and butter. That 5-car at Hendrick, that's the flagship. Even with all the history the 24 and the 48 have with Jeff Gordon, Jimmy Johnson, that 5-car is Hendrick.
Yeah, he's been a bit of their golden goose, if you will, in the short term. And he's found himself into that elite category. So it's just going to be something that you anticipate. It can't keep on forever. He can't keep having this lousy luck. He's got to turn it around at some point. Or else that would just be a historic breakdown. No pun intended on what he's been looking at here, making a push into these playoffs. More along the upper echelon of drivers.
Yeah, and you have a debate that has spawned this year. It's been prevalent for a little bit, but especially this year has been very vocal about how Kyle Larson could be the greatest driver alive right now. I mean, he wins on dirt, he wins in Cup, he has raced the open wheel cars of Indianapolis, or the Indy cars. He can do all these things, but if he's a first round exit because he has a bad day at Bristol, that would be huge. And I don't know how to approach Bristol if I'm that Hendrick team, because you have to feel happy with what Alex Bowman's done for you, obviously. Chase Elliott's Chase Elliott. He's just a super consistent guy, even if he's not winning everything like Larson does sometimes. Elliott's going to be there. He's going to probably get your top 5, top 10. I'm less concerned about him. William Byron's kind of tapered off since his hot start, but the person I would be most concerned about at Hendrick is Kyle Larson right now. I think he needs it. Like I said, he doesn't need to win Bristol to get into the next round. He needs a good day. But I think if you want to light a fire under him, you need him to go out there and do really well. Even if it's one of those races where he leads everything like he did at Darlington and then ends up not winning, that still gets you that gets you back on track, gets you refocused. I would expect a day like that going into Bristol, but just to have that entire team just mentioned once or twice, and not in a good way when it comes to William Byron, all of Hendrick just disappeared like a ghost at Watkins Glen.
Yeah, no, not the best kind of magic that they wanted to see, but this is just something where you got to dig deep, you got to settle in and say, all right, we're going to regroup. Bristol is going to be a much lesser difficulty type track, at least in the way of all the twists and turns that you have to deal with at WGI. It obviously wasn't Hendrick's week, so this is just going to be something where you have to just really say, okay, we're going to settle in here, we're going to be getting our top guys back out there. We're going to have some good runs. You just got to make smart decisions and just finish the race. That's going to be the first part of this battle. Just make sure you're getting across that finish line, whether it's going to be, even if you're back, even if you don't win, as you stated before, it's just something you need to make sure you're doing, picking up some points here and there. You cannot have these early exits. You cannot have these early incidents and crashes and just completely send yourself out as a factor, because then your playoff hopes continuing on might very much be going up in flames.
Yeah, and you have guys moving on to the next round. You're going to have 11 other guys who are trying just as hard, if not harder than you, to win these races and compete. Luckily for Hendrick, in their playoff bout, no playoff driver really had a good day. I think the most surprising was that the two guys who a lot of people picked as early exits in Chase Briscoe and Austin Cindric were the only two to finish in the top 10. There were none in the top 5. No playoff drivers in the top 5. You could argue, of course, Chris Buescher should be in the playoffs, but the way the winning in works.
He's been solid all year, though. So
he has been.
No surprise to see him win that race.
No, and it's a good feeling, too, because he was just so close. To have the closest finish in NASCAR history be what determines if you're in or out of the playoffs is heartbreaking. He had the run at Darlington that we saw. Even if he had a good finish that day, that could have been enough to push him over the edge. But there's an account on Twitter where if you follow it tracks the races as they're racing now, and it's the Winston Cup format, the Ladford system. And if you take how the points are set out in that system, Chris Buescher and Ross Chastain are 5th and 6th, with a good chance at making it would take a lot in these last few weeks, and they're not racing like that, obviously, because that's not the playoff system. But if they were, they're 5th and 6th right now. I don't know how NASCAR just looks at that and it's like, no, we got something way more exciting. But it's such a good thing. And it just goes to show how consistent of a driver Ross Chastain and Chris Buescher have been this year.
You're just not getting those wins.
The wins have really taken the precedent in NASCAR, and I know it's the you ain't first, your last mentality, but I don't think it's a very fair testament to judge drivers, because we've seen guys who are the best all year, but it doesn't matter because they got a bad handful of races.
Yeah, and you can get a slew of 4th, 5th, and 6th place finishes throughout the year, but if that's all you do, you could still be on the outside looking in, and that's what we talked about. That's the big flawed thing in this system. You could be an extremely consistent driver, always in the top 10, if not very close, But it doesn't matter because without that win, and if enough guys are getting wins, you're having a little bad luck or some crashes here and there, maybe where you took a wrong turn or you were trying to, just go a little bit more into a sense of daring, if you will, to try and get a win, and you ended up, wrecking because of it. That's going to put you on the outside looking in. So there's just a lot of factors to consider when you're trying to settle yourself into a playoff spot, which is, whether anyone likes it or not, what you got to do right now.
Yeah, you just got to play the system. As I say, don't hate the player, hate the game.
Yep.
But
that's where we are.
Interestingly enough, last tangent I'll go on. I don't want to over-explain my stance on the playoffs anymore. Chris Buescher's
right?
team. I don't know if you've listened to Radioactive. It is the segment on that NASCAR has where it's in-car audio from the race. And Chris Buescher's, after they won, they said, screw the chase, man. Who needs the chase? So you can see how the drivers and teams react. But
yeah,
like you said,
they still want to win,
yeah.
But to the point of it, getting them in the playoffs or just showing that, hey, I'm still a good driver. They just want to make sure that they're letting people know, I'm here, I'm still going to be, racing as hard as I can, and I'm still going to be a threat.
Absolutely. And to get onto a little lighter note of, if only he was in the playoffs. Insane race by Spire. I mean, the first time in their history where all three of their cars finished top 10. We almost saw Carson Hocevar steal this win.
He was close.
I was kind of pulling there for a second. I was like, Carson Hocevar could get this win, and it'd be a win that you can root for and not have to worry about any playoff implications because it's already started. So seeing him fight for that win and still end up third, that was amazing to see out of such a young driver. You have to feel really excited about his future in this sport. Zane Smith, as far as we know, still a free agent as of next year with him parting from Spire and Trackhouse. And then Corey LaJoie, who's had a year to forget in more ways than one, finishing 8th. He has 2 top 10s on non-super speedways, the first in his career in the last month. So one at Darlington, one at Watkins Glen. So maybe Spire's hitting their stride. Maybe we're going to see a new team competing for wins next year because we've seen some things at Aspire that, especially with adding Rodney Childers next year, there could be some drivers with a number 7 on them in victory lane, and I'm excited to see who they're putting in that 7 next year, pairing with Rodney Childers.
Yeah, some of these younger drivers growing up a little bit, getting a little bit more of that seasoning. It's a good thing, I would say. There's going to be folks that are longer fans of NASCAR that are, loving and ever so much loyal to these teams that have been around longer. But it's just nice to see younger guys coming up and trying to perhaps inspire just new fan bases and, bringing new fans into the sport. It's good to have a mix of some young and old, and that's a good way to continue the sport to grow. You can't just have the same fan base hanging around forever, not adding new fans, not adding some new faces and numbers that people could latch onto. It's a good thing, and it's only going to enhance the competition and make things more exciting.
Yeah, and I think this year has been great for marketing the sport. The drivers who have won, the finishes they've had, the reach they've had on social media. I think if NASCAR can, again, we've been talking about it, consistency is key here. Put everything together, and you could have a sports renaissance, a sport-wide renaissance of NASCAR, and that's what the fans have been wanting. You could hear a lot of people upset with certain things this sport does, and it's because we just want this sport to be what it was, and not in the way of we want to go back to the past, but we want to see those packed grandstands, and we've been getting that a lot. A lot of these tracks, Darlington was a sellout when we went. Watkins Glen, they sold out. You have these people want to go because the racing is good again.
It's been getting better. I will say. Yes. It's been getting better. And what a better time for myself to be getting back into NASCAR over the past few years. So it's been a pleasure to see in that sense. Just want to keep at it with this. And as we keep seeing it grow, and some of the old names are still around and some of these younger guys are coming up, just want to make sure that a lot of these drivers, the younger faces, are really starting to hone their craft to, make sure you're being a better and smarter driver out there. And we've talked about this before. Drivers like LaJoie really needs to work on cleaning things up next year. Probably try to make himself a bit more popular amongst other drivers too.
Yeah, LaJoie has a PR nightmare on his hands because of the incidents he's gotten into. I mean, he had the incident with Kyle Busch at Pocono. He's gotten into these tiffs with drivers, and then he starts a big crash that involves a bunch of playoff teams early in this one. So, and he's out of the 7 ride next year. Who knows? If he has not announced if he's returning to full-time racing for NASCAR. So there's no guarantee that he'll be back in the Cup Series next year. So he's got to work on these last, what is it now, 8 races. These last 8 races, he's really got to do a complete 180 on how he drives on the track. And even if it's with bad finishes, you can't have this negative PR on you that you're just known for wrecking people. Because there have been drivers that are known for wrecking people, but they tend to be either they're also winning or they're short-lived in the sport. So he's got to figure this thing out.
It's a bad crossroads
It
to
is.
be, not even finishing some of these races, still continuing to cause some of these wrecks and, falling behind yourself. And, it's something you don't want to see for any drivers, for anyone that's talented enough to get into the Cup Series of NASCAR to, reach that top pinnacle of the sport. You want to see them succeed. You want to see the playoff field and just the overall field be something to be reckoned with and to be exciting to watch. So hopefully whatever happens, whatever decisions he makes are the best for next year and season, and we just continue to see everyone else settle in and grow.
Yeah, we don't want to see guys who sometimes look like they're not supposed to be in the sport have an impact on these playoff drivers, which is what has happened, unfortunately. But to move on to something much lighter in in tone, that finish, that entire last lap. I know there's a controversy around overtime. Like, should it end at the advertised distance? Should we have unlimited overtime? Should we go back to green, white, checkered? Personally, I like chaos, but I think the overtime is a bit much. Sometimes with just the way these guys race each other, Tyler Reddick said, it's like some of these guys don't race with respect. But just focusing on the finish, going 3 wide into turn 1 at Watkins Glen, Hocevar, Buescher, and Van Gisbergen, these guys who obviously not in the playoffs. Van Gisbergen doing very well in the Xfinity right now, but not eligible for the playoffs anyway. That, and then having one of the best road course racers, or one of the best racers in general in the world, be shaken by Chris Buescher was incredible. And the broadcast mixed with Lee Diffie. I mean, we mentioned it several times throughout the race. That cable cam that they have through the bus stop.
Oh, looked really good.
Capturing as Buescher moves Van Gisbergen out of the way and getting underneath them and them getting into each other side by side. It was just a perfect final lap. And I know that the overtime thing is like, oh, well, should we do this? Should we do that? All that aside, in a vacuum, that finish, one to remember. Especially, or I should say, even if they're not playoff drivers, that's what I think NASCAR should be. Into these moments where sometimes they aren't competing for the championship. Sometimes it could be just trying to salvage something from the season, which is what I feel Chris Buescher has been doing. Because he missed the playoffs, you are in this lame duck 10-race stretch because you're just racing for points against your competitors, just for a better finish. But you get a win, and it's like, okay, I can do it again. You're not going into a drought, basically. It's like, I can still win, and I can do it in an incredible way, like they did. That was some good, hard, old-fashioned racing.
Well, every race should matter in that sense, whether it's a playoff race or something earlier in the season. Before we got into this whole playoff situation, and regardless of how we're here now, you want to make sure that whoever's watching the race at home, the fans there at the race, feel that the race is important. All these races should be taken serious in that point because it just makes it a lot more exciting for everybody. It's actually going to put butts in those seats because, oh man, this is a big race. This is, all these cameras, all these shots representing my home area, my home region, supporting a sport that I love to watch. And you mix it all up with some fantastic coverage, some great calls on air, or if you're a fan who actually has the, pleasure to go see it in person, it's only going to make it better. And all these races in an individual sense need to matter. That end of the race there, it sure sounded like it mattered, even though they weren't both playoff drivers, as you said.
Yeah, and Van Gisbergen warming up to go full-time in NASCAR next year. But it was pretty cool to look at all those shots and be like, oh, I know where that is. Oh, I know where that is.
I know. I was going to make that point. Yeah, we mentioned it in our last podcast. We both lived in that region for a little bit. We both worked WGI for a couple different races because we worked at a small local news affiliate up there, both at slightly different time intervals. But it was a great time up there. Nice to see that race in person. And that was actually my first NASCAR race in a long, long time. Because I've been to Pocono a couple times when I was little, when I was just a little kid. And that was pretty much it in terms of the big gap before seeing that one. Now getting back to Darlington here. And I'm excited to see more of the tracks down here in the Southeast, which, of course, we will get to. And that is something well down the road. But what isn't too far down the road, Adam, is Bristol.
Bristol. It's Bristol, baby. That's their tagline for a reason. Last great Coliseum, we have an interesting battle in the playoffs. Nobody except Joey Logano locked in. Christopher Bell, he can have an iffy day, but even he's not locked in at 46 points above the cut line. We have a really tight battle at the bottom right now. We have Gibbs, who's +6 in 12th. He is the cutoff. Chase Briscoe hanging in there, and then you have Byron and Larson, 25, 26, and then you go one more up to Ryan Blaney, he was last place this week, and he had the crash at Darlington where he was also last place. So the defending champion having some rough days. He went on a whole tangent about how upset he is that the DVP, the damaged vehicle policy, determined that they were done. They did not get a chance to try to fix their car, did not get a chance to look at it. It's like, you couldn't drive it back. DVP says you're done. And you can fight for every position if you can get that car back out there. So I understand his frustration there.
And he's your pick.
He is. That's my pick for who's going to win it all this year with the Fords. Yeah, with the Fords. And especially because not Chase Briscoe. Forgetting Chris Buescher. Sorry. Chris Buescher, again, keeping up with the Ford wins. Interestingly enough, the last driver to win who is not a Ford driver was Tyler Reddick.
Okay,
so
there you
when
go.
we started this podcast, we may have unleashed a Ford curse or a blessing if you're a Ford fan.
That's a good point.
Yeah, so speaking of Ford, Harrison Burton in a must-win, basically. He is 20 points below the cut. Martin Truex looking like that might be the prediction made here on the podcast, a surprise first round elimination. He's done well at Bristol, a second place finish in the spring race. So interestingly enough, 3 of the 4 drivers in the spring race were the top 3 finishers. So Hamlin won the race in the spring, of course. Martin Truex second, Brad Keselowski third. So you have some guys who, if this tire wears like it did in the spring, where we saw these tire failures, it made for great racing, because that's what fans want to see. They want to see tires matter. They don't want to just slap tires on it and let it go for 300 laps, You don't want an overtime situation with Joey Logano where they slapped tires on and they made it last over 100 laps. But if this comes into play again, this is going to be a real strategy and skill race, because Bristol, of course, it's 500-mile short track, lots of braking, accelerating. You need to be able to do that well. Denny Hamlin has done it plenty of times. Kyle Busch has done it plenty of times. These guys are good at this short track. Of course, Denny Hamlin's famous "I beat your favorite driver" last year. So he's good at this track with just 6 points. I think he really benefited from the playoff drivers having a bad week at Watkins Glen, coming in just 6 points below. But you have a few guys ahead of him that did not have good races in the spring race. Joey Logano, doesn't matter. He's locked in, but he finished 22nd in the spring.
Yeah, I thought he was a little bit back.
Austin Cindric, a 31st place finish, who surprisingly 43 points above the cut line. Austin Cindric, I picked him to go advance 2 rounds in this playoff. He could go further if he's showing off like this. Penske locked in for this playoff run so far.
They're looking pretty good too. Yeah, honestly. And started off strong. Just got to try and hang in there. So, yeah, might actually end up being a a good pick for you on this end. But there's going to be a lot that goes into Bristol here. And I just want to make a point even to what you said. Hamlin really could use some of that success, some of that magic that he's produced there in the past, because he's really in desperate need of it right now. The past 2 weeks, he's been very lackluster.
Of course, he had the lame duck run at Atlanta that ended up not working out for him. Caught up early in that LaJoie crash. I got to commend Hamlin and that team for keeping that thing on the racetrack. That car looked like it was ready to fall apart.
Yeah.
And
honestly,
they got it home. They got it home in one piece on the lead lap. They were not. They may have benefited from some late race cautions, but listen, you got to do what you got to do. You can only take advantage of what's around you. Hamlin to be -6 after these last 2 races, I think, going into a track he is historically great at. He's got to just be like, this is what I need. If I can get past Bristol, be yourself. Be yourself. Yeah, but I think if he can get past Bristol, he can take a deep breath, be like, all right, things reset. Let's go. This is when things, it's go time. He has Talladega, which is anybody's race. But if he can make it past this round, then I think he could just take a deep breath and be like, okay, this is when things really get going. So he just has to do well, and I think he will. But keep going down that line. Tyler Reddick, he seems pretty safe with a +30, but still 30th place finish in the spring. Him and Bubba Wallace had those issues. William Byron is in real danger, I would say, because he is in 10th, and he finished 35th in the spring. So he needs to, if this tire issue is going to come up again, the tire wear, Hendrick has to be on their A game. Like, they need this to be prime Gordon, Labonte going at it, because some of these guys are facing elimination and they shouldn't be. But it's just the way the playoffs work out. Some of these guys, you think they're going to win it all, and bad string of luck. So,
it's all it takes. All it takes.
All it really does. But I think Ford is they're going to show up, because they have been. They just, as soon as Daytona hit, and it's like, okay, time to go. And surprisingly, too, because of what happened early in the year, just wondering if they were going to win at all. And now they're the talk of the field, basically, with Joey Logano and Austin Cindric. Chase Briscoe hanging in there, +6 as well. So he finished 13th, so he needs a good day, but he doesn't need to have like a fantastic day. But it, of course, depends on if Keselowski, Truex Jr., Hamlin, if they're all running up front, these guys on the cut line, Gibbs, Briscoe, Byron, Larson, they're going to need to be right behind them, because they have a cushion, but not much. So moving forward, I'm going to take this prediction, or not this prediction, this pattern of Ford dominating.
Okay.
I am going to chuck it out because I am picking Kyle Larson, as I mentioned earlier. I'm doubling down. I said he would win last week. Kyle Larson, I think he figures this thing out. He cannot be a first-round elimination. Just the type of driver he is. Like I said, one of the best in the world, if not the best. The debate is him and Max Verstappen from the F1 series, but I don't think there's any way Kyle Larson can get eliminated. I think Hendrick gives them the best 5 car that they have in that shop, and they just say, dominate this thing. Do what you do best, which is dominate a race. Even if they can't win, just secure that spot, because you have a bunch of tracks coming up that Larson is good at. If he can get it done here, he is perfectly fine.
Yeah, they'll just like, lead those laps, buddy. Lead those laps. And I'm just going to cut in really quick, because I am picking him with my number 1 spot as well. Even though, just like you, last week, it's just to the point of, okay, he's got to get it together. I can't just not pick him again this week. This is where he's got to find the potential to get it together. So just to be on the same page with you, our first picks for this race, I'm all in on Larson as well to finally settle in back to his normal form.
Yeah, I mean, it's like when Aaron Judge was in that home run drought. It's like, it's not, oh, what happened to him? It's going to happen again. And I'm just, Atlanta, bad crash. Watkins Glen, Hendrick just wasn't competitive. I'm just thinking, it's like, you're going to get that meatball down the middle. And I think Bristol is that meatball. I think he's going to dominate. And I think he's going to win at short track racing on a Saturday night. I think Larson's going to show up. And I'm thinking he's going to win, but even if he doesn't, there is no way it would it would blow my mind if Larson is out of this thing come Sunday morning. But my second pick, again a little further back, but I don't think it is because it's last week's winner taking Ford, putting them back at the front, and I think Chris Buescher does it again. I think he goes back to back. He went back to back last year, not at Bristol, but Richmond. He had that win at Daytona and Michigan. He gets it done. I think he'll play spoiler because there are these guys who need this win. I mean, you have Harrison Burton who needs a win. Martin Truex needs a really good race. Keselowski. You have these guys who are going to be gunning for it. And if you have a guy like Buescher who says, I need all the motivation for next year. I think he can go out there. Like I said, Ford's been doing great. I think he is a great driver to get it done and continue to play spoiler. And just to round out the manufacturers, my last pick, again, not at all, probably one of the safer bets. I think Tyler Reddick gets back on track this week. 6th at Atlanta, 27th at Watkins because of that last spin. But I think he gets his redemption. He has kind of been, he's been there. He was there at Atlanta. Of course, the late race spin. That's just how road course racing can be on these restarts. But he cannot afford to have a Martin Truex Jr. repeat from last year, which is where he won the regular season championship and then just faded out of the public eye. Yeah, I don't think he will. I think Reddick, he's in his prime, or at least getting into it. Truex, of course, now final full-time season. He's up there in age, not as sharp as he was. Not saying that, of course, Martin Truex isn't going to just go in and dominate, or he can't go in and win Bristol. But I think Reddick, I think he is at his best right now. If not, we are getting to his best soon. I do not think it would be a surprise if he goes out, maybe not dominate, because he doesn't really just take over races. But I think he could be there at the end. And with the way overtime has been these last few weeks, he could just end up there in a good position to make a move, bump someone out of the way, maybe lead the pack, and make his car real wide, and end up taking it home and punching his ticket to the next round, getting those much needed points. But a win, I mean, he's 6, he doesn't need it. He just needs a good race and for the people behind him to not have dominant races. But get a win, you're right back on track. Go out and win Talladega next round and just keep on chugging along.
All right, my guy Reddick. I do love the pick with being a fan, but I'm going to hold off with him here. I do think he's going to get a win perhaps the next few weeks, but I'm going on with my general school of thought that he's going to be top 10. He'll have a good race, but my 2 other win picks for this one, I'm going to go with the Chevy. Having a good run for Byron. Think he's going to be making a good comeback here, continuing to charge up the field a little bit and continue to make that playoff push. I think he is poised to do it, along with my 3rd pick of Hamlin. I expect them to both be there in the top 5. Going to be a little bit of a power struggle up near the top, especially with what Larson is going to want to do. From what we already talked about before, I still think Larson's going to be a really safe pick at number 1 if he can lead some laps, if he can continue to establish some dominance. But I fully anticipate Byron and then Hamlin to really be hassling him down the stretch to try and secure a win here and really make a little bit of a leap in this playoff field where it's gotten a little bit tight for some of these guys, the lackluster performances, the wrecks, and that's 3 drivers that definitely want to see themselves in the top half of this playoff field, top 4 come the end of the season.
Yeah, and if they're in position again, we could see another chapter added to the Hamlin-Larson rivalry. I mean, you had Kansas, you had Pocono. You have these races where Hamlin is not afraid to get physical with Larson, and you can't be afraid to be physical in this playoff system, because if you're not physical, and they are, that could be your chance at the championship. So, Hamlin, really good pick. I think I mentioned when we did our playoff prediction, I think I had him winning Bristol. I just think there are the way I've seen these trends of Ford and some of these other guys who are just like, I need to win, like Larson, like how you said Byron, and just a guy like Reddick who's been consistent anyway. I would pick Reddick, but if I see a 3rd installment of I beat your favorite driver, would not be surprised with Denny Hamlin. I'm excited to see that Saturday night. I love Bristol night racing, short track racing in general. This next gen car has been a little, hit or miss. But if we can get those reds from the red tires from Richmond that we saw earlier this year with the Austin Dillon race, where you can have these cars just charging up through the field when they have a fresh set, that's what this playoff system, I believe, needs. Maybe not a system where it's, you can have the yellow tires that are, longer run, but then the red tires are shorter run but faster. But because that was kind of, it's a bit much for a playoff race. But if you could just get those reds on everyone every time, that makes some good racing, because then these fresh tires really, really come into play, and you get these strategies of when to pit, and then maybe fuel mileage doesn't make as much of a difference. Like, you don't need to be stretching your fuel so much because you just I need tires, so I'm going to get gas anyway. So Bristol, very much looking forward to it.
Bass Pro Shops night race, only in a couple days, or it might be after, depending on when you listen to this podcast. But it is going to be a fun one. Always gotta love it under the lights, and it's going to have a lot of big implications here as we make that deeper dive, and some drivers are not going to be too happy after this one with playoff hopes dashed, but plenty of playoff hopes to be saved as we make our way towards the end of this race. Mr. Adam, you got anything fun as we round out the final turn?
You absolutely know I have something fun, because
I didn't, but I'm glad you do.
Well, Tony, it's funny you mentioned something fun, because we have round 2 of Testing Tony. We got a little trivia. If you guys missed it a few weeks ago, I believe it was going into Daytona, I brought up the first Testing Tony segment. But 3 questions for you. This one a little more focused on what we have just seen and what we will see in the round of 16.
Okay.
Playoffs. First question. Playoffs were first introduced in 2014. Do you know what driver has the most round of 16 exits in the playoffs history? Of course, it's the 10th year. It is a driver. I'll give a hint. Actually, maybe I should.
Round of 16 exits.
Round of 16 exits. This is a first round bounce. I can't give a hint on this one because the hint I had would be probably giving it away. But it is a driver you would know.
I'm going to say Logano.
It is not Logano, actually.
Dang.
So the top 3 are Austin Dillon has 3 round of 16 exits. Eric Almirola has 3 round of 16 exits. Kurt Busch holds the unfortunate title at the moment of 4 round of 16 exits, getting in and then promptly leaving the scene. So, little, hopefully, unfortunate news for the guys at Stewart-Haas Racing with that one, even though, he was on a few different teams at that point. But hopefully it won't be the same case for Briscoe if things go their way, that they won't have to add to the Stewart-Haas elimination pattern there. But now moving on to question 2. We're still talking about the round of 16. We're in the elimination race. So, as we know, 4 drivers are going to have their 2024 championship hopes dashed come Saturday night probably around 10, 11, midnight. But which driver has clutched up the most and won an elimination race the most times? This is only playoff drivers. So when Ross Chastain won the championship race last year, he was not in the playoffs at that point, or he was eliminated. So that win doesn't count as a elimination win because he was not in the playoffs at that point. And also this counts non-championship races, since it's not, it's technically an elimination race, but I'm thinking round of 16, cutoff race, round of 12, round of 8. So, again, just to rephrase the question, which driver has won the most elimination races? And they have to be playoff drivers at that point, and it is a non-championship race. So not Phoenix, not the 36th race of the season.
Okay, I'm trying to think here. At least going, and playoffs started in 2014.
Yes, so this is the hint I can give you on this one, because it is, I can probably give you 2. if you need the second one. So the first one is they are a former champion. So they have won the playoffs before.
Okay. All right. I'm going to guess. So I'm trying to think of everyone's age here. It's like, all right, like who's actually been around long enough? Who's had more of those wins? Okay, can I get a second hint? Because I'm in between, like thinking about some guys that are a little younger, but someone that's also a little older.
So this might help with the age gap question. The hint is that they are still racing. So they are an active driver.
I figured they were.
Active full-time driver. So that eliminates guys like Kevin Harvick, eliminates guys like Tony Stewart, eliminates guys like Jeff Gordon, Jimmy Johnson. They are an active full-time driver.
Oh boy, is it Martin Truex Jr.?
It is not Martin Truex Jr. He actually does not make this this top four here. So I'll go upwards. So I mentioned champion. So the only one who's not a champion on this list, Hamlin, has won a cutoff race 3 times as a still playoff hopeful.
I knew it wasn't him because I know he's without a championship.
Joey Logano also has 3. Kevin Harvick has 3, so that's why I said an active driver, because Kevin Harvick was on that list too. But the driver with the most clutch wins in elimination rounds is Chase Elliott with 4.
Oh, Elliott. Okay. Yep. That makes sense.
Yeah, and he did so in pursuit of his 2020 title.
Okay.
Yeah, so now we're going to get a little bit into a name game. And you may have, if you are a, how do I word that? If you pay close attention to some of the things I bring up, both on podcast and not, this may be easy for you. I've even given you a little bit of a layup here. So, we just left Watkins Glen, and we've seen a lot of foreign drivers win in NASCAR's top division, especially on road courses. Shane Van Gisbergen was one of them. He won the Chicago Street Course in his first race. He has 1 win in his career. As of the recording of this, I anticipate that we'll probably see a few more, especially if he's racing how he was last week. On top of that, he ties the Canadian Earl Ross in 1974, who won at Darlington, and Italy's Mario Andretti in 1967, who won the Daytona 500. Could you name the 3 foreign-born drivers to win multiple races in the Cup Series? The hint is that they are fairly recent winners. Not recent, but fairly recent. You would know the names.
You say Juan Pablo Montoya.
Juan Pablo Montoya has won at Watkins Glen and at Sonoma, so that is 2 wins.
Has Suarez?
Suarez won Sonoma and Atlanta, so he is the second.
He has, okay.
Yeah, so Suarez, of course, Mexican-born. Juan Pablo Montoya, of course, Colombian. So can you name the last one? This one might be a little tougher, and that's why I say somewhat recent, because he was racing. I guess I can give you another hint. He was racing around the same time as Juan Pablo Montoya in the Cup Series full-time.
I feel like this is probably during that gap of time. I didn't watch NASCAR a lot when I got away from it. But I know I'm going to feel silly because I probably will still know the name and the driver. And I'm trying to blank. Hold on, give me one more second here. No, this one's not coming to me.
All right, so I did mention it. Daniel Suarez with 2 wins. Juan Pablo Montoya. And in 2011 and 2012, Marcos Ambrose. Mentioned him earlier when I mentioned Keselowski losing to him at Watkins Glen. He won back-to-back years at the Glen. So those 3 drivers, Daniel Suarez, Marcos Ambrose, Juan Pablo Montoya. Marcos Ambrose, of course, Australian. Those all 3 have 2 career wins.
Forgot about that. I was like, yeah, forgot he was Australian.
Yeah, so a little bit of a trick one there.
Yeah.
But Marcos Ambrose, a short but very, very memorable Cup career. Of course, his career coming across the sea, or maybe a little more than that. But definitely possibly one of the greatest final laps in NASCAR history. His race against Brad Keselowski to win at Watkins Glen in 2011, beating out Kyle Busch as well, who spun out earlier in that lap.
All right. I got to touch up on some of these things. I know some of these are deeper dives, or at least just stuff I'm not going to realize off the top of my head. But I do hope over time, definitely continue to improve on some of my scores. Luckily, again, we grade on a curve. So, 20, 30% is still a B here.
Yeah, and speaking of grading, we might have to figure out a scoring system on our little playoff bracket. So we might have to do a plus points for drivers who advanced that we picked, and minus points for drivers who we got wrong on eliminating or advancing when we said they wouldn't. Just one more thing before we go. We have released our first non-podcast video on the channel. It is an iceberg video where, of course, if you know what iceberg videos are, and if you don't, iceberg videos are structured like an iceberg on a topic, where at the top, where it is more, an iceberg more well seen, more visible, that is topics more well known. So you'll have stuff like your historic series, like the Winston Cup, Nextel Cup, stuff like that. Your 7-time champions are up there. But then as you go deeper, it is more obscure stuff that I really like to look into, of one-time winners, obscure drivers, all of the good stuff is at the bottom, is what I'm saying.
Weird stats.
Weird stats, of course.
Favorite driver color socks. Maybe not that much.
Maybe not that much, but you will get some. If you listen to it, you'll be like, oh yes, I've either heard of this or heard something in passing, or oh, I've never heard of this, this driver, this team, this situation, for example. Like there are, as you get down deeper, you get stuff like the 2008 Brickyard 400, which is known as the race that killed the Brickyard. That is on the second tier, and then as you go deeper, you can get stuff like practice crashes that weren't highly publicized because not practice crashes, like testing crashes, like Greg Biffle's crash or Brian Vickers' crash, stuff like that is not recorded, not televised. That is stuff that is just reported on, so you get some niche knowledge as you go down. So be sure, if you made it this point in the video, or this far in the video, probably should have mentioned it at the beginning, but oh well. If you made it this far, be sure to check that out now that this episode is wrapping up.
All right, everyone, as we continue to take you down the road, we've got the night race coming up. Bass Pro Shops night race, Bristol. We'll break it down and see what is left of this playoff field once the dust settles. I'm Tony. That was Adam. This is the Palmetto Pit Stop. Thanks for stopping by.